time to provide some entertainment for the Super Blog Team Up, paying tribute to the 30-year anniversary of Image Comics. So I had to make a quick decision. There's so much that you could cover with Image as an entity, the creators coming together to break off back in 1992 and forge their own path. I decided to do something that was pretty quick, at least quick for me. It's going to be a quick read, but I wanted to do something that was near and dear to my heart as well. One of the first issues that I can remember purchasing that was an Image comic, I picked up Dale Keown's Pit Number 1 off the shelf. It looks like it was released January 15th, 1993. Image Comics has had about 8 months at that point to kind of get going. Was I aware of Image at the time? There's a very good possibility I was reading something in Wizard Comics at that point. I was collecting comics, but I remember reading Wizard. Wizard Magazine, the Guide to Comics, number 6, had a Sam Keith Hulk on the front, and it looks to have hit shelves February of 92. At least that's the cover date. And I think I have, I can't remember which issue it is, but it talks about the formation of Image Comics in the issue. So anyway, needless to say, I don't know how I became aware of Image Comics. Most likely it was probably through Wizard. Now, I was collecting prior to that for a little bit. Apparently I'm buying comics as early as the age, I'm going to just say 5 or 6. It wasn't like I was continually buying comics at that point in time. Didn't have the money. I couldn't talk my parents or my mom into getting me comics at that point. But as I got older, I did get an allowance, and I did make decisions with what to spend that money on. And comics were at least among the top 5 things that I would probably want to buy. But Image Comics changed things for me. I knew Dale Keown's art from the Hulk, and that cover of Pitt. It's just a close-up of Pitt's face and ripping first issue. And I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, this cover sold me. I wanted to pick this up, and I wanted to read it. This was January of 1993. I was hooked. I started to want to read more of this universe. I started seeing the ads for some of the other Image comics that were coming out. They were building this universe with some of the hottest creators around at the time. But Image Comics really ignited a fire. There were some Image comics that I was very faithful that I collected throughout the years. Wildcats was one of them. Stormwatch was the other. Supreme was there as well. And Savage Dragon. So those 4 were my main titles that I was trying to make sure that I got every issue that I could for a good solid, all the way through 98, pretty much. When I got married to my wife, I couldn't justify buying comics anymore. Plus, the excitement just wasn't there. So this is the late 90s. Money and motivation to get comics just kind of fell to the wayside. The whole reason for the Super Blog Team Up right now is the fact that we are celebrating 30 years of Image Comics. The creation, the hype of this company, the universe that they put together. One of the things that I loved about it, I'm coming into my teenage years at this time. I'm 14 years old in 1992, getting ready to turn 15 in 93. The more mature nature of Image Comics, that struck right at the right time for me. Let's get back on topic here. Fast forward to 1993, all right? A young Jesse Starcher is not able to drive yet. One of my favorite things to do was to walk around the small town of Marietta. We didn't really have a dedicated comic book store. We had a small place called People's News, which carried a lot of comics. There certainly weren't back issues. This was just a newsstand inside a small building. That's normally where I would get my comics because it was right downtown. I could go right downtown to Marietta and get it. Then we had Alonzo's, which cropped up, which carried a lot of sports cards, collectible cards in some way, Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, and comics. There was a small store that was, just open for a cup of coffee. Real small store on one of the main streets in Marietta. Now, Darker Image, the book that I've come here to talk about today, hits the shelves March 23rd of 1993. Now, I remember the hype around this book for some reason. I should say the hype around comics at this point in March of 93. The death of Superman had happened. That took speculating to a whole other level. I started seeing these trends in comic books, but it was rare for me to have the money to turn around and purchase a few comics or something like that, just on the speculative part of trying to turn these things around for money. I definitely have more means of doing that now, 30 years later, than I did back then. You couldn't just grab an issue and then turn around and sell it on eBay. That wasn't a thing. The internet was in its very, very, very early years. But I decided to jump on that speculation bandwagon. And when Darker Image comes out, you start to hear that there's the first appearance of some of the more popular, or what are soon to be supposedly some of the biggest characters in the Image universe, and that is Bloodwulf, Deathblow, and the Maxx. Now, these comics came polybagged with 3 cards. This wasn't something that was never done before. Marvel had done it with X-Force #1. Darker Image followed suit, and this had a trading card for each one of these characters that are in this book. So it is the only books that I ever bought because of speculation. I had to get all 3 of those cards. 1 copy to read and 3 additional copies for the cards, because by golly, one of those cards was going to be worth $100. And it was going to still be polybagged. I wasn't going to open it. And yes, I still have all 4 copies of Darker Image sitting in a long box somewhere. So let's get into the issue here. This is Darker Image #1. First appearance of 3 major characters in the Image Comics universe: the Maxx, Bloodwulf, and Deathblow. The Maxx is a character that was created by Sam Keith. The Maxx #1 was on shelves March 9th of 1993. Now, this is credited as the Maxx's first appearance in a really old issue of Wizard that I was looking at, but I don't know if that's actually the case, because if the Maxx #1 showed up on shelves March 9th of 93, then this comic, which came out March 23rd of 93, chronologically would not be the first appearance of the Maxx. So I'd known a little bit about Sam Keith. I'd seen his work on Marvel Comics Presents, but just remember it being like this crazy, whacked out style. The Wolverine, the Hulk. I always thought he was a dynamic artist. You talk to Mark Ratlich, this #1, he can't get Sam Keith's name right. But he also hates his artistic style. Not the case for me. Loved Sam Keith. Loved the way everything that he drew looked. It looked dirty, grungy, nasty, but it was something that I was drawn to. Not only that, the Maxx is like one of the few characters that I can draw decently. I remember just looking at his art style and realizing that a character outline, there's not really much rounding to anything. It's all straight lines. Perfectly fine with me. I have a memory of sitting there at my grandma's table. Well, she had reams of paper. Where she got this paper, I have no idea. But it was just like these weird like order forms. I would take those pieces of paper and I would go sit down and draw. The Maxx, like I said, was one of those comic characters that I could draw the easiest. And I have a couple pieces of original art from back in early 90s. Whenever I strike it big as a big artist, which that is not my craft, ladies and gentlemen. Trust me, I'm not a good artist. But, those drawings are something near and dear to me. Looks like the story and art by Sam Keith, Bill Messner-Loebs on dialogue, Steve Oliff, which we've talked about on either this podcast or the Unspoken Issues podcast, one of the premier at the forefront colorists. And I will tell you that the colors in this comic really pop. Now, I've grown to appreciate in a very short amount of time the skill Steve Oliff has. Jim Sinclair on finishes and Mike Heisler on the letters. Let's go ahead and just experience this first story, and I'll kind of read through and just kind of throw some things out there as I go through it. So Darker Image #1, and as we go through the first story, my goodness, just look at this cover. The cover of Darker Image, we have this gray or this marbled kind of background, black hole in the middle of it, and our characters are kind of exploding from it. We got Deathblow on the left, Bloodwulf on the right. Down here in the middle is the Maxx. So I assume this is a Sam Keith cover because you could just tell by the ripplings coming off of Bloodwulf's torn shirt. the way those threads are drawn, that's very much a Sam Keith style, a Sam Keith marker, I guess you'd say. If you see that kind of stuff going on, you might know that you're looking at a Sam Keith piece. Deathblow's got the same thing going on, sort of, his bandana as it trails off, and he's got the rippled veins. That was one thing I loved drawing about the Maxx, was like, obviously they're very muscular characters, and Maxx is a very muscular character. So at first I was thinking this was a Jam piece cover, but it's not. That's definitely a Sam Keith piece. So I like it a lot. Love the shading on Deathblow, his face completely covered in shadow except for his eyes. Sick stuff. I don't know if he's got nunchucks going on there. And of course, oh goodness, Sam Keith could draw a lady. Granted, it's a this weird looking style that he's got when he draws humans. They're absolutely not photorealistic in any way. They are kind of frumpy. They're definitely not perfect, but there are definitely some curves. I mean, my goodness, you got a little butt crack going on there. That dress is low cut. The dress is just a little too big for her, actually. All right, let's get into this story. So like I said, hit the shelves in March of 1993. We're opening up with the Maxx, and just classic Maxx pose for me. Anybody who does not know who the Maxx is, oh, wow. I mean, I can't even describe it to you because it's so weird. It's just a strange character to try to describe to somebody. Yeah, hey, there's this guy. He dresses all in purple. He has these yellow gloves that kind of look like they are painted onto his hands. And he has one claw coming out of the top of each one of his hands. And that claw I've seen be really long. I've seen that claw be really short. Looks like our rendition here in this issue, most of what we get are kind of like the short version of this claw. But if you look at the Maxx, the one thing you're going to see initially is his face. And what you're going to assume is a mask. But really, there isn't a way to actually land on if that is a mask or his face. Purple mask, big yellow, kind of like parting thick line that goes down from the top of his head through the center of his face. But the most distinguishing feature of the Maxx is the teeth. Okay, Maxx's teeth, it's not like a mouth. They look like normal teeth that are just jutting from the top of his mouth, and you can't see the bottom of his mouth. It just looks like tusks almost, but it's not tusks. It's a row of teeth coming out of the top of his mouth, and that's it. So right at the jump, the appearance of this character is very, very strange. Getting into this, I'm like, wow, this guy looks really cool. What's he about? What is going on? All right, so we open up with the Maxx, hunched over, hanging out on a tree limb here, and I remember the chung. He has this headache, and that's the pounding in his head, but he says that it's good, and then you start to see that he's actually out here on a wilderness plains type of deal. He likes the pounding of his head because it helps him focus. Here's something interesting. Okay, most of what we get here is all inner monologue. Okay, he's not speaking out loud. At one point he says, "Someone coming, someone dangerous. I can smell the sweating leather and peppermint." So remember that. And here it is, this huge, I don't know what in the world this thing is, large beast walking down the plains here. And the Maxx has decided to hide from this thing. So Jeff Smith's Bone? I don't know enough about Bone to say what he is, but say the small white main character of Bone. So imagine that becoming a grotesque giant, and that's what the Maxx is hiding from here. The writing is really neat. Bill Messner-Loeb's doing a great job here because it's very descriptive writing. Some of the ways that he's using to describe what's happening. I can hear the empty wind punishing the grass. Somewhere a bird is screaming. Sets an atmosphere, in my opinion. So here we go. We got this large... So I'm going to say, take the main character of Bone, make him a giant, and then give him features that remind you of Billy Bob Thornton's Sling Blade. All right. Anyway, he's huge. The Maxx is scared. He takes off running. And this thing keeps trying to hit him with a hammer. This large club, sledgehammer thing. The Maxx just continues to try and get away. When you look at these pages, the panel layout is so interesting. the way that we use a lot of white. And that is important because as we progress through the issue, as Maxx is running away through this bright, beautiful plains land, he finds this large structure as this giant is chasing him, and he climbs into it. Everything is weird. He finds this thing that apparently is a house. It's got a bunch of boards on the front of it. He breaks in. Inside is the she-devil, as he calls her. He breaks in, and this is where we first meet Julie. Now, when he breaks into this house, she starts stabbing him with what looks to be like almost looks like a corn dog. But she's stabbing him over and over, and he ends up passing out while she kind of stands over him. My last vision is her terrible smile as she toys with my wounds. And she, of course, is in this skimpy jungle bikini. And then things shift. And we see that Julie is actually in her apartment, and she's had to sedate the Maxx. So all of this, we're assuming that we just read happened in the Maxx's head. It's funny because not a single name is given here. At no point does the Maxx refer to himself as the Maxx. I mean, the only reason you're thinking that this is the Maxx is because it's the name of the comic. Who knows what his name actually is? You don't get Julie's name either. But anyway, so we switch to what apparently is reality. And Julie is standing over the Maxx, who is laid out on her coffee table. He apparently had broke through her window. We learn that she's kind of decided to try and take care of this guy. He always comes back here all wasted, and I've got to clean him up and sedate him. So here's what I was wanting to point out earlier. He's sure ain't grateful or screaming out my windows about God clans and peppermint. So again, we're to assume the Maxx he's acting out what's in his head, actually in reality as well. Julie is kind of taking care of him. Julie is something else. She's not the perfect lady. She's a little dumpy, but she's got a figure on her. And the bell-bottom jeans. I mean, come on. So yeah, that's kind of where we end it. We get a great splash page, the signature Sam Keith. Well, the signature Sam Keith signature at the bottom there. And the Maxx crouching once again. It's funny because Julie's kind of excited, like maybe he's a young blood. Again, we're setting it up for this to be all one contained universe, the Image universe. You'll notice that Max's teeth change. At one point, his teeth may be square, and then at another point, teeth may come off as angled in some way. It's all these things are building a mystery around this character. So, yeah, I mean, I dig the Maxx. And I think a lot of it is because I don't know anything about the Maxx. This is one of those characters where you're like, you just want it to be what it is. We don't need an explanation, because once you start getting into explanations, things get dicey. Some things can just be as they are. And I've always wanted the Maxx to be that way. At some point, I might have to read more than the first 4, 5, 6 issues of Maxx. I know there's a lot out there. Plus, there was the TV series, which I've never seen. And for a character that I loved, I mean, I really did like the Maxx. I just never bought the issues, and I never followed up with the character. And there might be a reason for that. It might be, like I said, I don't want to know more about the character, and I'm afraid there might be something else about the character that I learn that makes me go, oh man, I wanted this to remain a mystery. And I do know some of the fun things that happen in the Maxx series. We get our villain, Mr. Gone. We get the Is. Look at that splash page. Beautiful. All those... Needs to clean up his costume. There you go. Next up, Bloodwulf. Now it's time for Bloodwulf. So this is a Rob Liefeld joint. Rob Liefeld on the story and art. Steve Oliff and Byron Tallman on colors. And Kurt Hathaway on the letters. So real quick about Bloodwulf before we get into this. I can remember Bloodwulf appearing in this comic. Me being like, oh wow, that's a neat character. I'll keep my eye open. And then the characters seem to drop off the face of the earth. But the advantage of the internet in today's day and age is able to go to the imagecomics.fandom.com in order to check out to see what issues Bloodwulf has appeared. And surprisingly, he has 9 appearances as Bloodwulf. There was a Bloodwulf series, which Bloodwulf's own series showed up in 1995. So he shows up for a cameo appearance in Volume 1 of Youngblood number 9 in 1994. And what you learn is that Bloodwulf was a parody of Lobo. what's funny is that I didn't know much about Lobo back in the 90s. So Bloodwulf showing up in Darker Image was novel to me. I didn't realize that this was a character that was poking fun. So let's see what Liefeld has in store for us here in this very first story of Bloodwulf. Okay, so we open up the story with Bloodwulf on his bike, which looks very much like a pistol. Looks kind of strange. Heading to Praxin 9 to confront a Director Butts, while two of the Emperor's sons insulted his grandma, Bloodwulf's grandma, so he's mad about it. He is upset. Bloodwulf is an interesting character, so let's try, I did my due diligence in describing what the Maxx look like. Let me explain to you what Bloodwulf looks like. Bloodwulf's hair goes straight up, almost like Vegeta style from Dragon Ball Z. So it's almost like it goes straight up to a point. I mean, he looks, for all intents and purposes, human, except for he has almost like red war paint on his face. Now, as to whether that's actually his skin color or if it's makeup, we don't know. But he looks big, bulky, huge muscular guy wearing a military vest of some sort, and that looks to be about it. No, he's got a shirt underneath there. So a military vest, of course, pouches for days. Pouches, pouches, pouches. He's got pouches around his thigh, and of course the rippling veins in his arm. Classic Rob Liefeld design. So he lands his bike at this place in Praxin 9, says he passes himself off as the courier, and there's two panels. On the second page of this, after he lands, he's walking through the space station or wherever he's at, Praxin 9, and he passes by what looks to be Lobo walking the other way. I mean, you can't get more on the nose than that. Lobo's walking the other way, and they do two panels of that too, which is funny because it's almost like the exact same. Well, I don't even know if that. Maybe there's two people that look like Lobo walking past them. I don't know. Wasn't aware enough of who Lobo was to probably have caught this. But this is one of the things that I loved that Image could do. They would reference other characters in either DC or Marvel, not by name, but they definitely would draw them or aspects of them to give them a nod. And that's going to happen here later in this story a second time. So we've got a DC character that just kind of showed up here, Lobo, who's just walking past. He's just, another guy walking past Bloodwulf. So Bloodwulf shows up trying to get in to see Director Butts. And Director Butts is sitting in his chair. Bloodwulf walks in, pulls his gun, and says, "Good night, Seymour." Get it? Seymour Butts? Oh, that's perfect. I think I just taught my kid. He had said something, play on words like this. And I said, "Have you ever read Under the Bleachers by Seymour Butts?" And boy, did he get this big smile on his face. Passing down the goods. So, okay, Bloodwulf pulls his gun, points at Director Butts, shoots him. Here's another thing that set Image Comics apart for me. Just think, little old Jesse Starcher sitting there reading his Marvel and his DC, and he gets his action, he gets his suspense. We'll say PG to PG-13 is what we're getting in Marvel and DC at this point in time. Then I have Darker Image here, where Bloodwulf pulls this pistol, shoots Director Butts, and even the director has pockets. Jeez Louise. The force of this bullet hits his head, that it rips his head clean from his body. And there's a couple ways that you could draw this, but it's over-the-top gore that has me going, oh yeah, this company's different. This has got my attention. The bullet hits Director Butts, sending his head clean off of his body. And the panel that we get is the director's head coming detached from his body. An eyeball falling out of his head as it flies backwards. Oh, yes, please. 14-year-old me is looking at this and going, wow, I want more. Okay, Bloodwulf shoots the guy. Now he's got to get off of this facility. Now, it's interesting because Liefeld uses these arrows to point towards things. Like, you see arrows actually throughout this story. There's an arrow in space on the second panel pointing him towards Praxon 9. There's an arrow as he's walking down the hallway pointing to which way Bloodwulf is going. There's an arrow that is pointing to the gun that says, "Oh crap." There's an arrow that points to a little package sitting on the director's desk that Bloodwulf left, that's obviously going to come back at some point, right? Because that's important. You wouldn't have an arrow pointing to it. So Bloodwulf is making his way out of there. Lo and behold, Cable, apparently either a member or even possibly leader of the security force here on Praxon 9. Okay, now when we talk about Cable, is this just kind of like an homage to Cable? No, this is straight up. This is Cable. He even has, okay, imagine 90s Cable that Liefeld drew. He's got the flashing eye. He's got the scar over the other eye. He's got the X badge. It is the X badge, except they took one line from the X and it looks like a Y. So to see him showing up here in the Bloodwulf comic, holy cow. I was like, oh yeah, there's no limits for these guys. We just had a head fly off the previous page. Now I've got Cable showing up here, and the astute comic reader would have recognized Lobo. But yeah, here we have Cable, who's trying to track down Bloodwulf before he can escape. Bloodwulf is making his way through the corridors with the security force chasing him. He turns a corner, and he's got these, I don't know, 6? Yeah, it looks like 6 security guys all pointing guns at him. So he's trapped until it's more than 6. So he just decides, all right, I'm going to kill everybody. So he grabs his 2 pistols and starts laying out everybody. Makes his way to his bike. Now, this is where things go off the rails. I mean, look, I know Goofy. Things can kind of get silly. Nowadays, I understand Lobo can get kind of silly. I've read a few Lobo comics. Bloodwulf makes his way to his bike. Now, I thought, okay, he's going to just be able to get on his bike and fly out of there somehow. Remember me telling you that his bike looked like a pistol. Bloodwulf gets behind his bike, proceeds to pick it up by its handle like a pistol, and shoot it at the security force. It incinerates every bit of them. And there are 3 panels where, okay, we just have the skeletons of the dead security crew. Bloodwulf, who has this large pistol in his hands, pistol bike, looks at the reader, smiles and laughs, gets on his bike and leaves. And there we have another arrow pointing to the package that was left on the director's desk. Big trouble, it says. And as Bloodwulf escapes with a maniacal smile on his face, Praxon 9 explodes. Bloodwulf laughs uncontrollably as he escapes. And that is the end of our Bloodwulf story here within Darker Image. Crazy story. Again, fantastic art. Shout out to Steve Olaf, Byron Tallman. Again, colors were just spectacular on this comic book. But yeah, Bloodwulf as a character, I was interested. But again, he didn't show up. I felt like this was a character that should have been used a lot more than he ever was. But this kind of brings me to my impression of Liefeld. Even back then, he always seemed to me like he had so many things going, he just couldn't keep track of them all. I don't know if that's a true story. And I understand money talks. So maybe a project gets started and you want to go somewhere else. But my goodness, there were so many things where I was like, oh yeah, let's get this started. And then 4 or 5 issues later, it's done. Bloodwulf shows up in this story, gone. There were too many projects that just seemed to be, he wanted to do and then just became unwieldy. The other side of that, you had Eric Larson. Eric Larson was very committed to the projects that he seemed to. Specifically, he was committed to Savage Dragon. He's still committed to this day to Savage Dragon. That is somebody that had a plan and wanted to execute it, did not have any other distractions. Now, Freak Force came about, Vanguard came about. It was more like, hey, here's the guy I want to do. This is the one project that I definitely want to keep doing. Maybe a couple other things may happen, but this is where a handful of projects compared to, or buckets full of projects, it's going to work out better. Hey, there's this ad. Oh man, the excitement. Okay. Now, I was aware of the Valiant universe. I think I remember reading, again, Wizard, I remember reading about Unity. I wasn't buying a whole lot of Valiant early on. As the word got around about the universe, I started to pick up some things. Ninjak, I remember picking up, Bloodshot, Eternal Warrior. Why am I bringing up the Valiant universe? There is an ad for Youngblood Bloodshot crossover. Now, you may have seen this ad. It's got Die Hard, Shaft, and Badrock/Bedrock on the front of the page, drawn by Liefeld, standing with Bloodshot. Now, Bloodshot was such a cool character. What a great look. And Liefeld drawing him, oh man, this blood's for you. Youngblood Bloodshot. this was exciting. I remember seeing this ad going, oh wow, okay. All right, so we're going to have a crossover. We're going to have a company crossover for Valiant and Image. I am so down. Well, they had it touted for July of 93. Anybody that knows anything about Deathmate Red, Deathmate Red ends up getting delayed months and months. It ends up finally releasing November of 93. This ad for Youngblood Bloodshot, I mean, again, just count me in. Count me in. So, all right, let's finish that up and we will get to Deathblow. All right, let's get ourselves nestled in for our final story here in Darker Image number 1, and that is Deathblow. Brandon Choi and Jim Lee are credited as co-creators and for the story here in Deathblow. Jim Lee also credited for the art, colors by Joe Chiodo, Mike Heisler on letters, and Wendy Fouts on color assists. So this is the first appearance of Deathblow. The first issue of Deathblow, Deathblow number 1, actually dropped May 18th, 1993, so a couple months after Darker Image hit shelves. I'm going to go through the comic, but let's just say there's not a whole lot here. There really isn't. I mean, the art it's actually kind of like a real quick, it's different Jim Lee, that's for sure. Jim Lee, I'm used to bombastic colors like in Wildcats or his X-Men. In this, it's very muted. Our colors are almost gray tones. There's some splashes of color, which are great. No, colors are used, we'll just say sparingly. Very bland, sort of. Of course, it takes place at night in a jungle that is lit by the full moon, so you're going to have a lot of shadows. But let's go ahead. We'll start reading this here, and there are a lot of words. This is definitely a change. We're changing gears. So here we have Deathblow, and our narrator is talking about how he hates the jungle, and he's come back to the jungle. Looks like, okay, so this is Deathblow on some kind of a boat heading down the river in the jungle, and he's getting his war paint on. So here's a perfect example of when colors are being used. Like I said, most of this is just kind of black, white, gray, and then you see the signature red line that goes down from the top of his forehead into his eye. So this red paint is getting put on, and he's getting ready to mix it up with somebody. A lot of description about how the jungle is so hot, humid. It puts you in the setting. Interesting art choices here. Like we have the boat that's going down the river, which you hardly see any features of the boat other than just a white outline of it. And our guide at the front, I believe. Nope. Okay, so our guide went down and checked on Deathblow, who is now in full armament, and he shoots the pilot of the boat. Well, now we're in Washington, D.C. Again, colors are still kind of muted. Oh, here's director Lynch. John Lynch. Oh, recruited to lead Team 7 at one point, which included, as we find out in this book, SEAL Team 7 included Michael Cray. That's Deathblow. All right, so yeah, big bit of history here for John Lynch. The setup here is that he's worked with Deathblow in the past. Oh, we find out that Cray is a rogue now, and he's off to go find General Manuel Ortega. Looks to assassinate him. Oh, Michael Cray has been diagnosed with cancer, inoperable brain tumor. Oh, so Lynch is sending out some people, a team to take out Michael Cray, terminate him on sight with extreme prejudice. Oh my gosh, wow, there are a lot of words. When you go from Bloodwulf and the Maxx to this, whew. So the leader of the team that's heading out to try and find Michael Cray is kind of wondering what he's getting himself into. Plus, he kind of feels bad that he's been tasked with taking him out because he's served with him in the past, thought he was a hero. Well, he's setting up the team here. Hopper, a Green Beret, packing hardware he's never seen before. Ford's Marine Recon. He's our jungle warfare specialist, knows Costa Mesa like the back of his hand. And Blackbird, a ranger. Rumor has it there's nothing on this planet he can't track. It almost seems unfair, all of us against one dying man. But then I remind myself who we're dealing with. Again, muted colors. Now, we do kind of change the color palette here a little bit while the team that's going after Cray's flying through the air. There's some green. Oh, this is interesting. So we're back at Washington, D.C., and Lynch is either getting debriefed or giving a debrief, something like that. There's a report of a finhead in Chicago making the national news, Savage Dragon. Also confirmed reports of an unregistered superpowered being trashing a biker gang in New York. Now that feels like Pitt, but I could be wrong. Again, setting up that universe, the Image universe. Okay, what an ending. Not a whole lot of action. There was a lot of action in Bloodwulf. Maxx got me kind of excited just because of the mystery and the unique look of what we had. Plus, it was a very vibrant type of feel. But this story ends on two guys just talking about how they've got to stop Cray from killing this guy because the government wants the matter resolved with credible deniability. So, a very dense 9 pages, I think, is what they said it was. And don't get me wrong, I mean, Deathblow looks pretty darn cool, but there is not a whole lot of action that happens in here. Very story-driven, steeped in military politics, but all in all, it's just kind of a setup to where, okay, things are going to go down, but it ends at to be continued. Out of the 3, Deathblow is the least favorite for me. This Deathblow story, I found out doing a little bit of research, it concludes in Deathblow Volume 1, Number 0. Also, one of the things that I found was that this was meant to be a 4-issue series. Darker Image was supposed to be a 4-issue series featuring gritty characters. Now, I'm taking this straight from theimagefandom.com. So a 4-issue series of this would have been neat. Actually, to get some of these stories to continue would have been pretty cool. But I did also a quick search on Twitter today and just typed in Darker Image and Liefeld. See what I came up with. There was a jam piece. I don't know if it was going to be on the cover of the next issue or what specifically, how it was going to be related to Darker Image, but Liefeld pretty much said it was a Darker Image jam illustration from his Instagram. Darker Image jam illustration from 1993. Okay, so this illustration had the Maxx, Deathblow, and Bloodwulf, so all 3 characters from what we see here in this comic, but it also had Pitt in the jam piece. So were they planning on putting Pitt, a Pitt story in like future issues, or was Pitt making an appearance? He's obviously mentioned here in the Deathblow story, so interesting. So there you go. As for me, I kind of covered at the beginning how important this book was to me and how, it does chalk up some nostalgia. Reading it again, there's some iconic things that stick out to me, specifically the Maxx story. I think I've read that story maybe 4 or 5 times. The Bloodwulf thing, entertaining, gory. There's the moments where you recognize some of these characters from other companies. And the Deathblow story was just, With the Deathblow story, if it was a movie, like after the end of this, the intro credits would have rolled for the movie. It was like the beginning, which is fine. The goal of this comic is to get you excited about what's possibly out there and what's to come. What are you interested in? Check this out because we're going to have an upcoming series on it. I hate the fact that it was only 1 issue. There was a Darker Image too that was penciled, not colored, and never printed. Well, I think that's going to do it. This has been Source Material's contribution to the Superblog Team Up. Listen, if you get a chance, just go on Twitter, type in hashtag SBTU. I'll actually put the hashtag in whatever way I'm promoting this. You can click on it. Most likely it'll take you to just about anything that the Superblog Team Up is putting out there to honor the 30-year anniversary of Image Comics. You can also look up hashtag Superblog Team Up. I want to just real quick give a special shout out to Chris Bailey for organizing this. It gave me the opportunity to get on here and talk about one of my favorite things, which is Image Comics. In our archive, you can probably find Source Materials coverage of Spawn #1, coverage of Savage Dragon #1. These were years ago. Stormwatch #1. My goal at one time was just to do the Image first issue of a series and talk about it. Like I said, got about 3 issues in, and then of course we got distracted and started doing some other things. But anyway, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to listen. Make sure to get out there and support the rest of those bloggers and podcasters participating in the Superblog Team Up. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Thank you all for joining us. Make sure to give that Radulich in Broadcasting Facebook page a like to stay up on top of all the great podcasts we have to offer. We are at home on Spreaker, but you can also find us on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, and recently we have hit the air on Spotify. Find your favorite podcast platform and type in RADULICH to subscribe for some great content. If you enjoyed this show, please feel free to share and spread the word. And as always, we appreciate any feedback and look forward to entertaining you again soon.